Hi, good afternoon, and welcome back to Raisina Fireside Chat. I'm this afternoon here with Mohamad Maliki bin Osman, Second Minister of Foreign Affairs from Singapore. ASEAN has been blessed by its geography. Given the geographic location, ASEAN has been at the center of the Indo-Pacific and, in some sense, the even beyond, you can say, global order in many ways. Both the United States and China have been trying to woo the ASEAN countries individually, but also the ASEAN as a grouping. But that is not limited to the two countries alone. In fact, more and more countries, particularly the middle powers, India, Japan, Australia, also have been trying to do the same thing, trying to get the attention of all the ASEAN countries individually and as a grouping institution. But at the same time, I think it also comes to mind that China has had a big brotherly role, as well as the role of a financier in many of the ASEAN markets. So does that put ASEAN in a tricky place in terms of balancing the relationship between the great powers? So I'm going to jump in. So today, to discuss all of this, I have the pleasure of having with me Mohamad Maliki bin Osman, Second Minister of Foreign Affairs, Singapore. So let me jump in and ask the big question on the great power competition. And I think that's something, especially given the context of the Ukraine war, that is so particularly relevant. So after about 3 decades, increasingly we are witnessing a return to a great power competition. The Ukraine conflict only accelerated or heightened some of the divisions among the great powers today. That was also brought in the West to somewhat consolidate in a somewhat more formidable manner. How does ASEAN look to manage as well as navigate these great power tensions in the coming years?
Well, thank you, Rajesh, for that question. Thank you so much to Raisina Dialogue for allowing us to have this fire chat conversation. You're absolutely right. I mean, ASEAN is a very important region and it's growing with some 630 million people. It's a recognizable market that many countries are very much interested in. And when we talk about major powers and its relationship with ASEAN, we should talk about the relationship between ASEAN and the relationship between the US and China. And that's really one of the most consequential relationships in the world that affects many different countries, including ASEAN member states. And really how US and China determines their own relationship, how and when they are able to work together in various aspects will certainly determine how the world order manifests itself and how we respond to some of these potential challenges or opportunities that can create itself depending on how they view their position in the world and how they view their own relationship with each other. And you asked the question about how about the other major powers? How about the middle powers? How does ASEAN respond to these major powers? So first, when you look at ASEAN and its relationship with China and US, I think ASEAN welcomes relationship with both US and China in many different areas, in trade, in security matters. In trade, for example, if you look at the statistics, China is one of the largest trading partners in many ASEAN states. And if you look at collectively, all of ASEAN collectively is the largest trading partner for China, right? So, and similarly, if you look at the US also is trading extensively in the ASEAN region economically, has a very important economic role. If you look at the foreign direct investment stock of US in ASEAN, it actually exceeds the foreign direct investment stock of US in China, Japan, and India together. Something to the tune of US $328 billion US dollars. So therefore, ASEAN is important to both countries, and ASEAN is also equally welcoming of other powers. And I think that's in the interest of both ASEAN as well as the other powers. And I think we welcome these engagements, but of course, whatever the engagements may be, there are certain critical areas that we're looking forward to. One is it must acknowledge and support the centrality of ASEAN and the unity of ASEAN. And that's critical to us because I think that's important in how ASEAN continues to navigate its relationship with the different superpowers. It's something for individual ASEAN states to also do so. So how we work in ASEAN is because ASEAN is made up of 10 countries of different stages of economic development, and we encourage every country, every ASEAN member state to continue to engage different partners because they are in a better position to determine how that partnership will work better for them. But at the end of the day, we are mindful that the centrality and unity of ASEAN continues to be at the core of those engagements.
So in relation to the first part of your answer, which is the Great Power Competition, some have written about and talk about possible return to a Cold War kind of framework, emergence of early days of Cold War. How do you look at that, and how are you going to go manage those tensions that might be imminent, especially in the Indo-Pacific region, because we have a China that's been particularly aggressive over the last couple of years, even in the middle of a pandemic. So how are the countries, how do you take forward ASEAN as a whole, but also how are the major in ASEAN countries individually managing this kind of tension in a sense?
Well, if you look at the history of ASEAN as a region is not a stranger to great power competition, but what we want to make sure is that we do not get caught in a zero-sum game, and that's how we've been engaging the superpowers. We're very clear. We're very clear. We want to engage on a level playing field for each one of them, and they know the position of ASEAN. And I think what's important is for us to continue to have open conversation to ensure that what we have is an open, inclusive regional architecture, which is ASEAN-led, and for major powers to continue to work with ASEAN. So we do not, and we don't think there has to be a zero-sum game. There can be win-win, and what we've seen today is it is. And so for major powers working with ASEAN and working with different member states, we hope they don't pull us into different sides so that we are aware that what's critical is the advancement of ASEAN as a whole, as a region. And that unity of ASEAN is critical because that has been the cornerstone of the 50 years that we've had of ASEAN, over 50 years. And ASEAN started out with this whole issue of security of the region, and we want to make sure that it continues to be front and center as we engage all the different stakeholders.
Talking about ASEAN unity, I want to ask you one tricky question that has confronted the ASEAN as a grouping is the Myanmar crisis. So how is the Myanmar crisis affecting the grouping, but also has it sharpened any divisions within the grouping, or how are you managing that?
Well, to be honest with you, 1 year after the coup, serious challenges remain. The violence has not stopped, limited release of political detainees, no dialogue among stakeholders. Of course, we are very concerned. We're very concerned, quite disappointed at what's happening, but we are still hopeful, and that has brought ASEAN closer together, looking at how do we manage this issue. More important is we will continue to press Myanmar to, in a positive manner, to ensure that peaceful and constructive manner that is in line with the 5-point consensus. And we have appointed our special envoy, ASEAN special envoy, which is the current foreign minister and the deputy foreign minister for Cambodia, to continue to engage Myanmar. And what's important is to engage rather than push Myanmar into isolation. And the last thing we want is that to happen, because I think if that happens, then we will be in a very difficult position. And so we continue to do so in that context.
I think India is mindful of that option as well. And I think India's own position is very closer to that of the ASEAN's five principal engagement in a sense. Absolutely, consensus, absolutely. So let me move to one other question on the Quad and the new latest entrant, the AUKUS. There has been some bit of controversy about the AUKUS and what does it mean for the region and beyond, or some of the other strategic partnerships like with France and another important strategic partner. So how do you assess groupings like the Quad and the
Yes.
AUKUS affecting ASEAN's role in the region, but also your own choices, options when it comes to dealing with the very rapidly changing geopolitical dynamics, in a sense.
Well, you see, these are realities of life.
Yeah.
You know, when we look at developments, we have to embrace development. We have to embrace evolution and how things evolve. And different countries look at their own strategic positioning. They look at their own domestic issues. They look at regional issues and the context of how this regional infrastructure influence their own domestic considerations. And so ASEAN acknowledges that, Singapore acknowledges that. Well, our Singapore's position in such regional architectural formulation, be it initiated by China, US, or any other countries, has been very consistent and clear. So I'm just going to repeat myself a little bit more here, because one is whatever it is, what kind of regional architecture formulation that is being proposed, whether it's AUKUS, whether it's Quad, or any other formulation, three conditions that we look out for. One is that it should support the centrality and unity of ASEAN.
Yeah.
Two, it should advance economic engagement of the region, trade, investments, connectivity.
Yeah.
And three, most important, is it should espouse an open and inclusive rules-based world order anchored on international law. And if these conditions are met, we welcome, we understand what these things are, and we continue to want to be engaged in conversation so that we can take the relationship forward.
So with your emphasis on the inclusive, open, sort of a regional, rules-based international order, including in the Indo-Pacific region, how are you looking at the role of China in the, China's role has evolved over the past decade in particular. How are you engaging with China, and how is that relationship growing, both in the security sector and in the economic domain as well, of course?
Well, China is one of our key partners in ASEAN. In ASEAN, we have got dialogue partners. China is one of them, US is one of them, India is one of them. So how we treat China, US, India, it's all in the same context of which they have an important role to play, security, economic. They have an important role to play to understand ASEAN as a whole. And we continue to want to do that. So we hope that major powers, ASEAN, China, US, and India for that matter, continues to see the importance and the potential for ASEAN in their own context. And Singapore, for example, this year Singapore is the coordinator of the ASEAN-India dialogue relations. And we look forward to advancing this relationship forward. We are looking forward to organizing the special India-ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting in Delhi. And we look forward to be able to engage India and be facilitative in that process, and so that India continues to be engaged in ASEAN.
Thank you so much. In fact, my last question was going to be on the India-ASEAN and India-Singapore ties, given that we have had a strong security and defense ties. So thank you so much for bringing that aspect, and given that Singapore is going to play a crucial role in the India-ASEAN framework in the coming year. Thank you so much, Mr. Maliki, Mr. Maliki.
Thank you, Rajesh.
Thank you again.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me.